children out of here! That ship is gonna blow now!
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're looking at 10 of the biggest explosions ever recorded.
Nobody who was close enough to see it survived.
For this list, we'll be looking at the largest explosions throughout human history, measured in terms of magnitude and yield. For the sake of variety, we will be excluding atomic bombs for the most part, but not entirely. What do you make of these history-making events? Let us know in the comments below. Number 10. The Evangelos Florakis Naval Base Explosion. In the early morning hours of July 11, 2011, an explosion ripped through the Evangelos Florakis Naval Base, which was situated on the island of Cyprus. The base had improperly stored a large number of dangerous military materials, including gunpowder and artillery shells. Various containers exploded and started a small fire, which in turn resulted in the larger explosion. With the equivalent of 481 tons of TNT, the explosion ripped through the base, killed 13, injured 62, and decimated the nearby Vasilikos power station. Half of Cyprus was left without power, and the explosion could be heard upwards of 30 miles away. It also cost upwards of $3 billion in damage, which further devastated the island's already crippled economy. Number 9. The N-1 Launch Explosion. The N-1 was a Soviet rocket that was hastily constructed in the midst of the space race. The rocket went through 4 launches, and each resulted in failure. The problems were numerous, including underfunding and rushed construction. The second launch occurred on July 3, 1969, and resulted in an unmitigated disaster. Shortly after takeoff, the rocket tilted 45 degrees and plunged back down to Earth. The propellant on board instigated a massive explosion that sent debris rocketing up to 6 miles away and shattering windows across the complex. With the force of 650 tons of TNT, the launch complex was turned into a fiery crater. Luckily, the rocket was unmanned and no serious injuries were reported. Number 8. The SS Grand Camp Explosion. Nestled beside Galveston Bay is the city of, well, Texas City. An industrial port town, Texas City once housed a vessel called the SS Grand Camp that inadvertently launched an incredible explosion. A fire started inside the SS Grand Camp on the morning of April 16, 1947, and ignited the ship's stores of ammonium nitrate. The ship exploded with the force of 790 tons of TNT, sending shrapnel hurling in the air at supersonic speeds.
Windows were shattered as far as 10 miles away in Galveston. 2 light aircraft flying above the port were also caught in the explosion.
Thousands of nearby buildings were leveled, airplanes were knocked out of the sky, and everything within a 2,000-foot radius was destroyed. The explosion resulted in more than 560 deaths, with 145 coming from the nearby Monsanto Chemical Company, which was demolished in the accident. Number 7. The 2020 Beirut Explosion. Ammonium nitrate is incredibly dangerous, and history repeated itself 73 years after the Texas City disaster. Large quantities of the substance were improperly stored at the port of Beirut in Lebanon, and in the evening of August 4, 2020, they exploded with a force of 800 tons of TNT. This explosion was captured by countless cameras and quickly spread throughout social media. It left behind a crater 140 feet deep and caused $15 billion in damage throughout Beirut. The explosion registered as a seismic event and could be physically felt throughout parts of Europe.
A former port worker told the Guardian newspaper he warned for years it was a disaster waiting to happen and says nothing was done.
It was even heard up to 150 miles away on the island of Cyprus in Greece.
A lot of people have actually been very angry about the statue. The feeling is that such a monument should come when there has been some kind of justice.
Number 6. The Dupont plant explosion. Back in the early 20th century, the village of Pleasant Prairie in Wisconsin hosted a DuPont chemical factory that was notorious for accidents. The worst of all came on March 9, 1911, when an explosion ripped through the factory with a force of 1.1 kilotons of TNT. It left behind a crater 100 feet deep, leveled most of the village, and it could be felt more than 130 miles away. Police in Chicago even believe that their city had experienced a bombing, so loud and concussive was the explosion. The explosion was traced to the DuPont factory, which was housing over 100,000 kegs of blasting powder and 300 tons of dynamite. Number 5. The Opau Explosion. If there's one thing to glean from this list, it's that ammonium nitrate really needs to be stored correctly. Back in 1921, a mixture of nitrate and sulfate was being stored in the town of Opau, Germany. On the morning of September 21st, this mixture exploded with the force of 1.5 kilotons of TNT. It left behind a crater 3/4 of a mile wide and could be heard in Munich, over 200 miles away. Most of the town was destroyed in the explosion, and it shattered glass in nearby towns.
Es gab kein Vorbild für eine vergleichbare Rettungsaktion. Und auch die französische Besatzungsmacht.
About 10 miles north of Opau is Worms Cathedral, which was built throughout the 1100s. The church contained authentic medieval glass windows, but they were all blown out in the explosion. Number 4. The Port Chicago disaster. On the night of July 17, 1944, military servicemen were loading munitions onto the SSEA Bryan, which was bound for the Pacific Theater.
There were about 1,400 sailors there, all African American. The officers were all white.
Unfortunately, this resulted in what is now known as the Port Chicago disaster.
Every kind of ammunition that the Navy's using was very dangerous. You know, that's the thing that constantly stayed on your mind.
With the force of nearly 2 kilotons of TNT, the munitions exploded and sent debris rocketing miles into the sky. Nearby ships were torn apart like paper and flung into the ocean, and most of the surrounding area was completely obliterated. The explosion measured 3.4 on the Richter scale and caused the modern equivalent of $145 million in damages. 320 people died in the explosion, including civilians. This made it the largest loss of civilian life on American soil in World War II.
We have to now recognize that that's dangerous and life-threatening work, and we don't know that we want to put ourselves in harm's way like that again.
Number 3. The RAF Fold Explosion. To this day, the RAF Fold disaster remains the largest explosion to have occurred on British soil. In the late morning of November 27, 1944, munitions held in an underground storage depot exploded with the force of 2 kilotons of TNT. Luckily, the depot was in the middle of nowhere, so damage and death was limited. Still, the explosion completely decimated nearby farms and destroyed a water reservoir, which in turn caused extensive flooding throughout the area. A mushroom cloud was sent miles into the sky and was observed by nearby civilians. The resulting crater covers an area of 12 acres and can still be seen today in the village of Hanbury.
Sorry to inform you, your son is missing, presumed killed. He was 15 years old and he's never been found. And if it had been found, it would have been easier. Because he wasn't found, it makes it 10 times as hard.
Number 2. The Halifax Explosion. The little Canadian province of Nova Scotia is home to the largest non-nuclear explosion in human history.
Thank God she's a half a mile away. She's loaded, boys. You gotta get out of here. It's full of explosives.
It occurred on the morning of December 6, 1917. The cargo ship SS Montblanc collided with the SS Imo, which started a fire aboard the Montblanc. This fire ignited the onboard munitions, resulting in a historic explosion. It hit with the force of 3 kilotons of TNT and completely leveled the surrounding area. Casualties numbered at least 1,782, and many lost their sight from the intensity of the flash.
Some of the returning soldiers said they had not seen worse destruction on the fields in Flanders.
The smoke rose 2 miles into the sky, and the explosion caused a 60-foot tsunami that washed the SS Imo ashore. Put simply, it was unlike anything that humanity had experienced at the time.
We want to forget it. It hurts so much.
Number 1. Zarbamba. While we said we're mostly excluding atomic bombs, this Soviet hydrogen bomb mishap was too massive to ignore. Officially known as AN-602, the Zarbamba yielded the most powerful explosion ever recorded in human history, with the force of 50 megatons of TNT.
Ноль! Взрыв сопровождался световой вспышкой необ...
Little Boy, the bomb which was dropped on Hiroshima, yielded just 15 kilotons of force. This makes the Zarbamba 3,000 times more powerful than the atom bomb that glassed an entire city. The resulting fireball was 5 miles wide, and the mushroom cloud stretched 42 miles into the mesosphere.
Полевой столб, поднимающийся с земли, быстро увеличился в объеме. Через несколько секунд после взрыва
the blast wave traveled around the Earth 3 times, and the flare was visible more than 600 miles away. So, yeah, it was a big explosion.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.